There's a moment when you realize that everything you've been taught about strength is a lie. It happens in an instant, usually when you're at your most vulnerable, when the carefully constructed armor you've built around yourself finally cracks under pressure. And in that moment of absolute exposure, something extraordinary occurs. You discover that your greatest weakness was actually your greatest strength all along, but not in the way you think. Most people spend their entire lives building fortresses. They accumulate credentials, develop thick skin, perfect their poker faces, and learn to never let them see you sweat. They mistake this performance for power. They confuse the mask with the face, and they wonder why, despite all their efforts to appear invulnerable, they still feel hollow inside, still wake up at 3 a.m. questioning everything, still find themselves shattered by the smallest unexpected blow. Here's what they don't understand. True power doesn't come from appearing unbreakable. It comes from being genuinely unshakable. And there's a profound difference between these two states that most people never discover because they're too busy maintaining their illusions to glimpse reality. When you appear unbreakable, you're constantly defending. Every interaction becomes a potential threat to your image. Every question is an attack on your credibility. Every moment of uncertainty feels like a crack in your foundation. You're always one unexpected challenge away from having your entire persona crumble. This isn't strength. It's fragility disguised as invincibility. But when you become genuinely unshakable, something remarkable happens. The very thing that others try to use against you becomes irrelevant. Not because you've built better defenses, but because you've transcended the need for them entirely. When you fully embrace what you are, including your uncertainties, your humanity, your evolving nature, there's nothing left for others to expose or exploit. This is the paradox that Machiavelli understood when he wrote that it is better to be feared than loved, but he never completed the thought. What he didn't say, what perhaps he couldn't say in his time, is that it is better still to be authentic than to be either feared or loved, because authenticity makes you immune to both flattery and intimidation. When you have nothing to hide, nothing can be held against you. Let me show you exactly what this looks like in practice. Picture this. You're in a meeting, presenting a proposal you've worked on for weeks. Halfway through, someone interrupts with a pointed question designed to expose a gap in your research. Everyone in the room turns to watch your reaction. This is the moment most people either deflect, double down, or crumble. But here's what happens when you've developed genuine unshakability. You pause, not because you're buying time, but because you're present. You look directly at the person who asked the question and say, "That's an excellent point. I don't have a complete answer to that right now, and I'm grateful you brought it up because it's going to make the final proposal much stronger." The room doesn't erupt in judgment. Instead, something else happens. The tension dissolves. Your credibility actually increases. Why? Because you've just demonstrated something rare, complete comfort with your own humanity. You've shown that you're secure enough in your own competence to acknowledge its limits. This isn't weakness. It's a form of power so pure that it can't be faked or imitated. Most people in that room have spent years learning elaborate ways to avoid admitting when they don't know something. They've developed sophisticated deflection techniques, learned to pivot conversations, mastered the art of sounding confident while saying nothing. And here you are, cutting through all of that performance with simple honesty. It's terrifying to them because it reveals how much energy they waste maintaining their facades. This principle scales to every aspect of human interaction. Consider social media, that grand theater of performed lives. The platforms are filled with people desperately curating images of success, happiness, and control. They post their highlight reels and wonder why they feel empty inside. They attack others to feel superior and wonder why nothing ever feels satisfying. Now imagine someone who posts about their actual experience, the messy middle of learning something new, the genuine excitement of a small victory, the honest confusion about a complex issue. They don't perform strength. They embody presence. And something magnetic happens. Real connection begins to form because authenticity recognizes authenticity. When someone tries to attack this person online, the attack finds nothing to grip. When someone says, "Look at this person admitting they don't know everything," the response isn't defensive or aggressive. It's simply, "Exactly. Isn't it refreshing?" The attacker is left holding a weapon designed for a battle that isn't happening. This is what I mean by becoming unshakable rather than appearing unbreakable. The unbreakable person lives in constant fear that someone will discover their vulnerabilities. The unshakable person has already integrated their vulnerabilities into their identity so completely that they've become sources of strength rather than weakness. But let's get more specific about how this plays out in the most challenging scenarios. In romantic relationships, this principle becomes even more powerful because intimacy requires vulnerability, and most people are terrified of both. Picture a confrontation with a romantic partner. They're upset about something you did or didn't do, and they're expressing it in a way that feels like an attack. They say, "You never really listen to me. You just wait for your turn to talk." Most people respond to this either defensively, "That's not true, I always listen," or aggressively, "Well, if you didn't talk so much, maybe I could get a word in." Both responses miss the deeper dynamic. They're both forms of performance designed to protect ego rather than address reality. But watch what happens when you respond from genuine presence. You're right. I do that sometimes. I get so caught up in wanting to share my perspective that I miss really hearing yours. I don't want to be that way with you. This response is simultaneously vulnerable and powerful. It's vulnerable because it acknowledges imperfection. It's powerful because it demonstrates someone so secure in their own worth that they can face criticism without crumbling or counterattacking. Most people can't handle this level of honesty because they've never learned to separate their actions from their identity. The unshakable person understands that being wrong about something doesn't make you wrong as a person. Making a mistake doesn't negate your value. Having room to grow doesn't diminish what you've already accomplished. This understanding creates a kind of immunity to manipulation, because most manipulation depends on people's fear of being seen as inadequate. When someone tries to shame you into compliance, they're counting on your attachment to appearing perfect. When someone tries to intimidate you with their credentials or status, they're assuming you need their approval to feel valid. When someone tries to manipulate you with guilt, they're banking on your fear of being seen as selfish or uncaring. But none of these tactics work on someone who has genuinely integrated their humanity. They don't need to appear perfect because they're comfortable with their imperfections. They don't need others' approval because they've developed their own internal compass. They don't fear being called selfish because they understand the difference between healthy boundaries and actual selfishness. This creates what I call tactical invulnerability. Not because you can't be hurt, but because the kinds of attacks that devastate most people simply don't land. You've already acknowledged everything they might try to expose about you. You've already integrated everything they might try to use against you. Let me give you another concrete example. You're at a social gathering, and someone makes a comment designed to diminish you in front of others. They say something like, "Oh, you're the one who thought that project would work. How did that turn out?" It's delivered with just enough plausible deniability to seem like an innocent question, but everyone can feel the poison in it. Most people either get defensive, "Well, actually, we learned a lot from that experience," or try to redirect. "At least I try new things instead of just criticizing from the sidelines." Both responses accept the premise that there's something to defend against. But here's what unshakability looks like in this moment. You smile, not a forced smile, but genuine amusement at the transparency of the attempt. You say, "It was a spectacular failure, one of my most educational experiences." And then you maintain eye contact, completely comfortable with the silence that follows. What just happened? You've acknowledged the failure without accepting the shame. You've reframed it as education without being defensive. Most importantly, you've demonstrated that their attempt to diminish you has only revealed their own insecurity. The power in the room has shifted, not because you've attacked back, but because you've shown that you're immune to that particular form of attack. This is advanced psychological warfare, but it's warfare through transcendence rather than aggression. You're not fighting on their battlefield, you're revealing that their battlefield doesn't actually exist. This is what Machiavelli meant when he observed that the greatest victory is the one that requires no battle. When you're genuinely unshakable, most conflicts resolve themselves before they begin because there's nothing for others to push against. But this raises a crucial question. How do you develop this kind of authentic presence without becoming vulnerable to those who haven't? Because there are people in the world who will interpret authenticity as weakness and try to exploit it. There are individuals who mistake kindness for naivety and attempt to take advantage. This is where the sophisticated understanding of power becomes essential. Being unshakable doesn't mean being passive. It doesn't mean accepting abuse or manipulation. It means being so grounded in your own reality that you can respond to any situation from a place of choice rather than reaction. When someone tries to exploit your authenticity, you don't abandon authenticity, you exercise it more completely. This might mean setting clear boundaries, removing yourself from toxic situations, or even ending relationships that aren't serving your growth. But you do these things from a place of clarity rather than emotional reactivity. For instance, if someone repeatedly tries to manipulate you through guilt, you might say, "I notice you often frame my boundaries as me being selfish. That pattern isn't working for either of us, so I'm going to step back from this dynamic." You're not attacking them, you're simply stating your reality and acting accordingly. This level of clarity is more threatening to manipulative people than any form of aggression because it reveals their tactics without giving them anything to fight against. They're left trying to manipulate someone who sees exactly what they're doing and simply won't participate. This brings us to the deeper philosophical foundation of this approach. What we're really talking about is the development of consciousness, not just awareness of external circumstances, but awareness of your own internal patterns, motivations, and responses. Most people live their entire lives reacting to circumstances without ever examining the beliefs and assumptions that drive their reactions. When you develop genuine consciousness, you begin to see that most of what you thought was reality was actually interpretation. Most of what you thought was truth was actually conditioning. Most of what you thought was strength was actually fear disguised as aggression. This recognition is simultaneously humbling and liberating. It's humbling because it reveals how much of your life you've lived on autopilot. It's liberating because it shows you that you have far more choice in how you respond to circumstances than you ever realized. Consider how this plays out in professional environments. Most workplace dynamics are driven by status anxiety, people constantly positioning themselves relative to others, trying to appear competent while hiding their uncertainties, building alliances based on mutual benefit rather than genuine connection. When you operate from genuine consciousness in these environments, you stand out immediately. Not because you're performing superiority, but because you're not performing at all. You ask real questions when you don't understand something. You give credit where it's due without worrying about whether it makes you look less important. You focus on results rather than appearances. This authenticity is so rare in professional settings that it creates its own form of influence. People are drawn to someone who seems to know who they are and what they're about. They trust someone who doesn't seem to be hiding an agenda. They want to work with someone who makes the environment feel safer and more real. But here's where it gets really interesting from a power dynamics perspective. When you're operating from this place of authentic presence, you often end up with more influence than people who are actively trying to accumulate power. Why? Because real power comes from others' willingness to follow your lead, and people are more willing to follow someone they trust than someone they fear. This is the paradox that most people who study power never understand. They think power is something you take or accumulate, but real power is something others give you because they recognize your competence, integrity, and authenticity. The person desperately trying to appear powerful often repels the very thing they're seeking. Let me give you a specific workplace scenario to illustrate this. There's a team meeting where a major project has failed and leadership is looking for someone to blame. Most people in this situation either try to deflect responsibility onto others or disappear into the background hoping not to be noticed. But imagine someone who stands up and says, "I was the lead on the communication strategy for this project, and I clearly didn't anticipate how the messaging would be received by the target demographic. I take full responsibility for that piece, and I've already begun analyzing what went wrong so we can avoid similar issues in the future." This response accomplishes several things simultaneously. It demonstrates accountability without drama. It shows leadership thinking by focusing on solutions rather than blame. It displays confidence in one's ability to learn and improve. Most importantly, it often redirects the entire tone of the meeting from blame-seeking to problem-solving. The person who responds this way often emerges from such situations with enhanced rather than diminished reputation, even though they've acknowledged a failure. Why? Because they've demonstrated the kind of character that leadership wants on their team. They've shown that they can be trusted with increasing responsibility because they won't try to hide or deflect when things go wrong. This is what I mean by tactical invulnerability. It's not that nothing can touch you, it's that the things that destroy most people's careers often enhance yours because you've learned to work with reality rather than against it. Now let's examine how this applies to the most challenging arena of all, public criticism and social attacks. In our current digital culture, the ability to withstand public scrutiny has become a crucial skill. Most people live in terror of being called out or becoming the target of online criticism. But here's what's fascinating. The people who survive and thrive despite public criticism are usually those who've learned to own their humanity rather than deny it. They don't try to appear perfect. They acknowledge their imperfections before others can point them out. They don't claim to have all the answers. They share their process of figuring things out. When someone tries to attack a person like this, the attack often backfires. You can't expose someone who's already transparent. You can't shame someone who's already acknowledged their mistakes. You can't diminish someone who's secure in their own worth. Consider this scenario. Someone posts something online criticizing a position you've taken publicly. They're clearly trying to make you look foolish or uninformed. Instead of defending your original position or attacking their criticism, you respond with something like, "You've raised some points I hadn't fully considered. I'm going to think about this more deeply. Thank you for the perspective." What just happened? You've acknowledged the validity of their criticism without accepting the implied judgment about your intelligence or worth. You've demonstrated intellectual humility without appearing weak. You've modeled the kind of discourse that actually leads to learning and growth. This response is often more disarming than any counterattack could be because it reveals the critic's intent. If they were genuinely trying to contribute to understanding, they'll appreciate your openness. If they were trying to score points or diminish you, they're left with nothing to work with. This principle becomes even more powerful when dealing with coordinated attacks or pile-ons. When multiple people are criticizing you simultaneously, the temptation is either to fight back against everyone or to disappear until it blows over. Both responses often make the situation worse. But what if you responded to the entire group with something like, "I'm seeing a lot of criticism of my position, and I'm taking time to really consider what you're all saying. Some of these points are things I need to think about more carefully. I appreciate those of you who are engaging with the ideas rather than just attacking the messenger." This response does several things. It acknowledges the criticism without accepting abuse. It separates thoughtful critics from those who are just attacking. It demonstrates that you're someone who can learn and grow. Most importantly, it often causes many of the attackers to back down because they realize they're targeting someone who's actually listening. This is the power of genuine presence in digital spaces. Most online interaction is performative, people saying things for effect rather than connection. When someone responds from a place of authentic engagement, it often transforms the entire dynamic. But let's go deeper into the psychology of why this approach is so effective. At its core, what we're talking about is the difference between ego-driven responses and consciousness-driven responses. The ego is always trying to protect itself, to appear right, to maintain status and control. Consciousness is interested in truth, growth, and genuine connection. When you respond from ego, you're predictable. People can manipulate you by threatening your self-image. They can control you by offering or withdrawing approval. They can trigger you by challenging your beliefs or competence. But when you respond from consciousness, you become unpredictable in the best possible way. You're not driven by the need to win or to be right. You're driven by curiosity, authenticity, and the desire for genuine understanding. This makes you incredibly difficult to manipulate because you're not attached to the outcomes that manipulation typically targets. This is what Machiavelli was pointing toward when he wrote about the importance of being both the lion and the fox. The lion represents force, the fox represents cunning. But what he didn't fully articulate is that the most powerful combination is consciousness that can express itself through both strength and subtlety as circumstances require. When you're grounded in authentic presence, you can be incredibly direct when directness is called for. You can say things like, "This conversation isn't productive, so I'm going to end it here." You can set boundaries that seem harsh to others, but feel completely appropriate to you. You can remove yourself from situations that aren't serving your growth without feeling guilty about it. But you can also be incredibly subtle when subtlety is more effective. You can ask questions that help others discover their own contradictions. You can share perspectives that shift entire conversations without anyone realizing you've influenced the direction. You can create space for others to change their minds without having to admit they were wrong. This flexibility comes from being unattached to any particular mode of interaction. You're not trying to be the nice person or the tough person or the smart person. You're simply being present to what the situation requires and responding accordingly. Let me give you a complex example that demonstrates this principle. You're in a relationship with someone who has a pattern of making subtle criticisms disguised as jokes. They say things like, "Oh, there goes my perfectionist partner again," or "I guess some of us just can't relax." These comments are designed to modify your behavior through social pressure disguised as humor. Most people respond to this pattern either by getting defensive, "I'm not a perfectionist, I just care about doing things right," or by modifying their behavior to avoid future criticism. Both responses give the critic exactly what they want: control over your actions through emotional manipulation. But here's how this looks from a place of unshakable presence. The next time they make one of these comments, you simply look at them with genuine curiosity and say, "What's really going on here? You seem bothered by something, but you're expressing it as a joke. Can we talk about what's actually bothering you?" This response cuts through the manipulation by addressing the underlying dynamic directly. You're not accepting the disguised criticism, but you're also not attacking them for making it. You're inviting them into a more honest conversation about what's really happening between you. This often creates a moment of choice for the other person. They can continue trying to manipulate through humor, which now feels obviously manipulative because you've named it, or they can step into a more honest conversation about their actual concerns. Either way, you've freed yourself from the dynamic. If they choose honesty, you can address their real concerns directly. If they continue the manipulation, you now have clear evidence of what's happening, and you can choose how to respond to that pattern. This is what I mean by tactical invulnerability. You're not vulnerable to manipulation because you're willing to engage with reality directly. You're not controlled by others' attempts to shame or pressure you because you've developed your own internal compass for what's appropriate and what isn't. But this raises the question of how to develop this kind of presence in the first place. Because what we're talking about isn't just a set of techniques, it's a fundamental shift in how you relate to yourself and the world. The development of genuine consciousness begins with honest self-examination. Most people avoid this because they're afraid of what they might find. They're afraid they might discover they're not as smart or kind or important as they'd like to believe. But this fear is based on a misunderstanding of what self-examination actually reveals. When you look at yourself honestly, you don't discover that you're fundamentally flawed. You discover that you're fundamentally human. You have strengths and weaknesses, successes and failures, moments of clarity and moments of confusion. This isn't a problem to be solved. It's the human condition to be embraced. Once you accept your humanity completely, something remarkable happens. The energy you used to spend maintaining your image becomes available for other things. The attention you use to focus on how others perceive you can be redirected toward what's actually happening in any given moment. This redirection of energy is what creates the presence that others find so compelling. When you're not constantly monitoring and adjusting your image, you become genuinely available to connection, learning, and growth. People can feel this availability, and they're drawn to it because it's so rare. This presence also makes you incredibly effective in any domain because you're dealing with what is, rather than what you wish was or what you're afraid might be. In business, this means you can spot opportunities and problems more clearly because you're not filtering information through your ego needs. In relationships, this means you can respond to what your partner is actually saying rather than what you're afraid they mean. The cultivation of this presence is a lifelong practice, not a destination you arrive at once. It requires consistent attention to your own patterns, motivations, and reactions. It requires the willingness to be wrong, to change your mind, to admit when you don't know something. But here's what makes it sustainable. It's actually easier than maintaining a false image. When you're being authentic, you don't have to remember what story you told to whom. You don't have to worry about being found out because there's nothing hidden. You don't have to perform because you're simply being yourself. This ease is part of what makes authentic presence so powerful. While others are exhausting themselves trying to maintain their images, you're operating from a place of effortless integrity. While they're defensive and reactive, you're responsive and present. While they're trying to control how others perceive them, you're focused on what's actually happening. This creates a natural leadership that doesn't depend on titles or positions. People follow authentic leaders because they want to, not because they have to. They trust authentic leaders because authenticity is its own form of credibility. They respect authentic leaders because authenticity requires a kind of courage that most people admire, but few possess. But let's address the elephant in the room. Doesn't this approach leave you vulnerable to those who operate without conscience? What about people who will exploit your authenticity, take advantage of your openness, or mistake your presence for weakness? This is where the sophisticated understanding of boundaries becomes crucial. Being authentic doesn't mean being naive. Being present doesn't mean being passive. Being unshakable doesn't mean being unresponsive. When you encounter someone who tries to exploit your authenticity, you respond with clear boundaries rather than defensive reactions. You might say something like, "I'm noticing a pattern where you seem to interpret my openness as an opportunity to take advantage. That doesn't work for me, so I'm going to step back from this interaction." This response is simultaneously authentic and protective. You're not attacking the other person, but you're also not allowing yourself to be exploited. You're stating your reality clearly and acting in accordance with your values. The key is that your boundaries come from a place of self-respect rather than fear or anger. You're not trying to punish the other person, you're simply protecting your own well-being. This distinction is crucial because boundaries set from self-respect are much more effective than boundaries set from reactivity. When someone encounters boundaries that are set from genuine self-respect, they often back down immediately because there's nothing for them to fight against. You're not engaging in a power struggle. You're simply stating what you will and won't accept. They can choose to respect those boundaries or remove themselves from the interaction. This is the ultimate expression of what I've been describing as tactical invulnerability. You're not trying to control others or force them to treat you well. You're simply creating the conditions where only respectful interaction is possible with you. As we near the completion of this exploration, I want to address the larger implications of what we've been discussing. because what we're really talking about is nothing less than a complete transformation of how power operates in human relationships. The traditional model of power is based on dominance, having more resources, more status, more information, or more force than others. This model creates a zero-sum game where one person's gain requires another person's loss. It breeds insecurity, competition, and constant strategic maneuvering. But the model we've been exploring represents a completely different paradigm. It's based on presence rather than dominance, authenticity rather than strategy, consciousness rather than manipulation. In this model, power isn't something you have over others. It's something you embody within yourself. This shift has profound implications for every area of human interaction. In business, it means moving from competition-based thinking to collaboration-based thinking. In relationships, it means moving from need-based connections to choice-based connections. In society, it means moving from hierarchy-based structures to presence-based influence. But perhaps most importantly, it means moving from fear-based living to consciousness-based living. When you're no longer afraid of being seen as imperfect, you can focus on actually becoming better. When you're no longer afraid of being wrong, you can focus on discovering what's true. When you're no longer afraid of being rejected, you can focus on genuine connection. This transformation doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't happen without practice. It requires consistent attention to your own patterns and reactions. It requires the willingness to feel vulnerable while building genuine strength. It requires the courage to be authentic in a world that often rewards performance. But for those who undertake this journey, the rewards are extraordinary. You discover a way of being in the world that is simultaneously more honest and more effective. You develop relationships that are based on genuine connection rather than mutual need. You create influence that comes from inspiration rather than intimidation. Most importantly, you discover that the thing you were most afraid of, being seen as you really are, turns out to be the source of your greatest power. When you stop hiding your humanity, you stop being vulnerable to those who would use it against you. When you embrace your imperfections, you become immune to perfectionist manipulation. When you accept your limitations, you discover your actual strengths. This is the paradox at the heart of authentic power. The thing that seems like it should make you weaker actually makes you stronger. Not stronger in the sense of being able to dominate others, but stronger in the sense of being unshakable in your own reality. And here's the final truth that those who master this approach discover. When you become genuinely unshakable, you often find that there's very little left to shake. The dramas that consume most people's energy become irrelevant. The competitions that drive most people's behavior become meaningless. The fears that control most people's choices become obsolete. You don't transcend these things by avoiding them or by becoming indifferent to them. You transcend them by becoming so grounded in your own reality that they simply don't have the power over you that they once did. This isn't detachment, it's integration. You're fully present to life without being controlled by circumstances. This is what real transformation looks like. Not the dramatic before and after stories that fill self-help books, but the gradual development of a way of being that is sustainable, authentic, and genuinely powerful. It's available to anyone willing to do the work of honest self-examination and authentic expression. The work is simple but not easy. It requires giving up the illusion of control in exchange for the reality of influence. It requires giving up the performance of strength in exchange for the development of genuine resilience. It requires giving up the safety of hiding in exchange for the power of authentic presence. But for those who make this exchange, the world becomes a completely different place. Not because the world has changed, but because they have developed the capacity to see it clearly and respond to it consciously. They have become the kind of person who doesn't need to fear exposure because they have nothing to hide. They have become the kind of person who doesn't need others' approval because they have their own. They have become the kind of person who doesn't need to appear powerful because they have become genuinely unshakable. And the beautiful irony is this: When you stop trying to appear powerful, you often discover that you've become more powerful than you ever imagined possible. Not power over others, but power within yourself. Not power to control circumstances, but power to respond to them consciously. Not power to avoid difficulty, but power to transform through it. This is the secret that the truly powerful have always known, but rarely shared. Real power doesn't come from what you can do to others. It comes from what others cannot do to you. And what they cannot do to you is not because you've built better defenses, but because you've transcended the need for them entirely. The journey toward this kind of unshakable presence begins with a single step: the willingness to see yourself clearly without judgment. From that foundation, everything else becomes possible. The masks can come off. The performance can end. The real work can begin. And that real work, that commitment to consciousness over comfort, to authenticity over approval, to presence over performance, that is where true transformation lives. Not in the dramatic moments of change, but in the daily choice to be real in a world that often rewards pretense. The transformation only begins when you don't stop at the first step. See you there.